that beyond. So that is on the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to open it up to discussion with the council at this point. Councilmember Calhoun.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of things, some thoughts that I had as we had a little more time to really think about this. I did hand out to everybody a map of the city limits so that everybody knows kind of, you know, we all generally know what we're talking about when we say that, but this will show us, and this came from our community development website, so I'm assuming it's fairly accurate. First thing that I wanted to say is, and I understand there were some comments that people made concerning a city manager not living inside the city limits and not living by the same rules or codes or whatever as the rest of us. The thing to understand about that, I guess, is none of our other city leadership is required to live inside the city limits and live by the same fire codes, the same police ordinances and laws that is inside the city limits. And the city council is the one that sets those, not the city manager. The city manager doesn't decide what the rules are going to be living in Seward as far as rates, as far as ordinance code, that kind of thing. The city council does that. So I don't know that we can hold the city manager to that particular standard. Another thought that I had, it was brought up about the time of disaster and a city manager getting stuck on the other side of the three bridges because that's outside the city limits. One thing I have to say about that is if you look at the house across the bay that the city council approved way back in 2000 or so for Mr. Anderson to build his house over there inside the city limits. It's down Nash Road quite a ways on the other side of the three bridges. So a city manager could live there and still be under the same circumstance as somebody living outside the city limits. Okay? And another thought on that same line is city managers in Juneau, in Washington, D.C., on the other side of the peninsula, up in Fairbanks, on vacation, doing city business, and that happens. It's not because they lived outside the city limits, it's because they were doing business of the city or personal leave or whatever at that time. So I don't really go along totally with that. And so those are just some of my thoughts. If you look at the city limits boundaries, city managers can live a lot of places that could limit their ability to get in case there were certain issues. So I just wanted to point some of those things out. I understand people's concerns with all of those thoughts, and I appreciate that. It is part of our process, but there are things already set in place that make some of those not as valid as they might seem at first look. And that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Councilmember Finch.
I know there were some concerns about being the incident commander. A lot of people don't know how the incident command system works. I did it for 20 years. You have a police chief, fire chief, Doug Schlosser responding. She's going to be directing stuff, whether she's right there or she's dealing with multiple incidents in town. She's there to help back them up and get what they need done. So whether she's in city limits or not, you know, like when they had the landslide, Doug Schlosser was there. He was the first one on scene. He started getting things moving, you know, contacted her and got things moving. People don't just stand there and wait for the incident commander to show up. They're designated staff that are initiate the system. Okay. I was looking at this, and something I kind of wrote up was no further than Seward Highway mile marker 10 and exit Glacier Road, and no further than mile 5 mile marker Nash Road, and between those 2 road mile markers, which would cover Camelot, and not be on Lowell Point.
Okay, thank you. Other discussion? Councilmember DeMoss.
And what is your concern about not in Low Point?
Councilmember
Because
Finch.
how many landslide we have a year there? You know, we've had some rough years where I remember Miller's Landing having to run staff to the prison on the boat because we had landslides there. And we just had that one last year.
Councilmember DeMoss.
So just because that's more of it's a higher chance that there would be an event
Unstable road
in that
events.
area?
Yeah, unstable road.
Opposed to the Three Bridges or?
Would you like to make that into a motion?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead.
And I'd like to have a motion for Resolution 2023-028 to read, right here, in there that no further than Seward Highway marker mile 10 to include Exit Glacier Road, and no further than Nash Road mile marker 5, or between those 2 road mile markers, and not allowed Lone Point anywhere.
Okay, I'll need a second for that.
That way
Okay.
it gives them more detail for the voters to see the layout.
I'm not hearing a second.
I'll second.
Okay, second. So you can further discuss or describe that if you'd like.
Because this way, the voters see where, okay, they're not living in Moose Pass, they're not living in Cooper Landing or in Anchorage. This confines them to a closer area of Seward.
Okay, other discussion on that? Yeah.
I have a question.
Councilmember Calhoun.
Because obviously this is not quite that detailed. Where's mile marker 5 on Nash Road? Where is that exactly? I mean, where does that take us?
Can
That's almost to the prison.
administration take a look at a map there?
Yeah, that's.
I know mile 3 is
Mile
about where you
5
go up to, up Mount Alice Trail.
Mile 5 is Betty Cato Road to the front of the prison.
Oh. Okay.
And the reason I'm wanting mile 10 is because as Camelot and Old Mill is expanding, you never know how far out those could be.
Okay.
Okay.
I have
Councilmember
a question on limiting it to mile 5. Does that mean then we're going to eliminate all the city limits that are past that? If some of that develops down the road?
Right.
But that would still be in city
Um,
limits.
Councilmember Finch,
Sorry,
say that again.
but wouldn't that still be in city limits, which would apply?
Councilmember Calhoun, do you see that? or-
No, I get that, but doesn't the city limits start, you know, there's a chunk of Nash Road between that part and that's not in the city limits. So we're really only talking about a little bit. As long as it doesn't affect future living out here, so all you're really talking about then is this little stretch of road that that is outside the city limits.
Right. And then it turns into the city
Councilmember
limits.
And then obviously the part before, you know, a lot of Nash Road before.
Okay, so we're discussing Councilmember Finch's amendment. Councilmember Garma.
So, when you say to mile 10, does that include then, obviously, Exit Glacier, all of that?
That's why I said
Councilmember
Exit
Finch.
Glacier also.
Oh, you did, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
you didn't. Okay.
So,
Okay, I'm thinking that's really good. I personally, I think if we're going to put this on the ballot, I'd rather just have something simple. I have a potential amendment just saying that we will provide code language to enact boundaries after the vote. So it might, I don't know, I'm concerned about the specifics. I know that's what we're trying to get to, but I'm a little bit concerned about on the ballot proposition, people reading that and thinking, oh gee, you know, I don't want this area, I don't want that area, and it might influence the the way they vote. I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. But Councilmember Finch, yeah.
My concern was to make it clear for the voters to say, oh, well, it's not going to be Moose Pass or Cooper Landing.
Right. And
There's still a restriction.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. That's what we were aiming for the other night, I believe. Councilmember Barlow.
Could you do something to the effect of specific language we included later, but it will be within a 10-mile radius of Seward?
Well, that could be a potential other amendment that we could come up with, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that was something I had thrown out before, but I'll get to you. Councilmember DeMoss.
I just wanted to say that I would support an amendment like that. I think something that if we could word something a little bit more general within a 10-mile radius. I know that's hard to say because where do you start the radius? I guess, right? Like where do you start it? Like at mile 0? No, it would be mile. So anyway, I guess I would support something to be specified later, but at, you know, at this moment within 10 miles or 15 miles or something.
Okay. Councilmember Calhoun and then.
Well, yeah, just sort of a thought, and again, I didn't go that deeply. Is Old Mill within mile 10? Because mile 0 is right down there.
It should be.
Vice Mayor Osenga.
I think it is. I think it's only, it's 8 miles out, so
Cross Lake of Days.
7 to 8 miles, yeah. It's 7 to 8 miles out on the highway.
From down there.
Yes.
Councilmember Finch, did you have
So that's why I threw in 10 because of the way Camelot and Old Mill can grow, hopefully looking down the future. But with Morwell's recommendations, how about something as simple as amending it to not to exceed past mile marker 10 for the voters to know, and then we can detail it out later.
Vice Mayor Osenga.
So a suggestion might be to just, because we are talking about how city limits goes across to SMIC and all this other stuff on Nash Road, would it be just as simple just to say not past mile marker 10 on the Seward Highway? And then that way it's just simple. I mean, there's a lot of hyperbole we can do and a lot of guessing we can do about living in the middle of the bay, but that's not gonna happen. So for right now, it would just simply be mile marker 10 on the Seward Highway. And I mean, you don't know farther than mile 10 is what that would.
That could be another amendment if we're still talking about a
Yes,
specific
right,
amendment.
right,
But
right.
that's a valid point. Over here, Councilmember Calhoun.
I'm just thinking, Mayor, I'm just looking at, thinking of Vice Mayor Osenga's thoughts, mile 10 Seward Highway and around? Or then do we have to also say, well, mile 10 Seward Highway, how much of Nash Road? And my other thought, just on a separate, because it's in there, is I don't really think we need to eliminate Lowell Point, regardless of the landslides.
Agreed.
I don't think there's a reason to eliminate that. It doesn't happen every week. It doesn't even happen every year for more than a few hours to clear some snow.
We're still discussing the amendment. Vice Mayor
Right.
Osenga.
Well, just on the amendment. I would just, so speaking to the amendment as it's stated now, I would probably say no, just because of, I think it's a little confusing, and I don't think we need to eliminate Lowell Point either.
Councilmember Barlow.
So if we just got rid of the word radius and said within 10 miles of city center?
I don't think the amendment has the word radius in it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could we read the amendment again?
The amendment is no further than Seward Highway to mile marker 10 and exit Glacier Road, and no further than Nash Road mile marker 5 or between the two road mile markers, and not out on Lowell Point anywhere.
That's the amendment we're going to vote on.
And
And go ahead, Councilmember Finch.
I'm willing to adjust the amendment, however.
What if we vote on that amendment and then we can make another amendment. That might be the quickest thing. Would that be all right with everyone? Okay, Madam Clerk, we're ready to vote on that amendment.
Okay, voting on that amendment, Demas,
No.
Wells, sorry, my mistake. Finch,
No.
Barnwell,
No.
Calhoun,
No.
Osenga,
No.
and Mayor McClure.
No.
Okay, that amendment has failed.
Okay, I'm going to provide an amendment then, that, because we could be at this a very long time. I'm going to provide, I will move to add the language, "The council shall provide in the code for language enacting geographical boundaries for the manager." Boop. And I'd ask for a second.
I'll second.
Okay, and the point there is, we'll go, if the voters vote yes on this proposition, then we will dig deep into those boundaries at that time, but it eliminates the specifics.
Could you read that one more time?
Sure.
please?
This is adding at the end of the proposition. "The council shall provide in the code for language enacting geographical boundaries for the manager."
Thank you.
And part of my rationale with that too is this will be voted on if, this is on there. In May, it will be the same seated council that we have now, barring any dramatic accidents or something. So those of us discussing it now will be the same people then, but gives us a little more time and to hear from people on this, where do we want to, so that's just a general, so anyway, so we discuss that amendment, if you will. Councilmember Barnwell.
Why not take that one and then add no further than 10 miles from city center? Some language that specifies, because the voters are going to look at that and automatically go, well, our city manager is going to live in Moose Pass or Soldata at that point. So it just narrows that down so they know that our intent is to keep it within a reasonable distance to city center.
Councilmember Demas.
What does city center mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, see, that's the issue that we're,
Why
anyway.
don't you just,
There's nothing that.
Okay,
Hall.
we're just
City
discussing
Hall.
the amendments.
City
so-
Hall.
Yeah, city hall.
Bob's house.
There you go.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay,
City center now.
10 miles is the thing?
Madam Mayor, I'm sorry to interject, but if you wish to, you can make a secondary amendment to that effect, if you wish.
Right, or I could amend my, but-
Or you could.
yeah,
if
so
that's
I
what
was
you
going to propose, I'll amend my amendment then.
want. Okay.
And I'll amend it to read, "The council shall provide in the code for language enacting geographical boundaries not to exceed 10 miles from City Hall for the manager."
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I just want to
Madam-
interject. City Hall may not always be here. Hopefully it is,
That's a point.
but it could move.
Okay. Well, the council, here, I'll reword it. "The council shall provide in the code for language enacting geographical boundaries not to exceed 10 miles from mile marker 0 on the Seward Highway," which is only a few blocks from here. And who was my second on that? Oh, do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a secondary amendment now. Because mile marker 0 will, speaking to that, will always be down at the bottom of the street, and that's a good boundary. So, discussion on that amendment. Are we pretty okay with that? Good. Oh, Councilmember Demas.
So the only thing I would just want to point out is that it would be easier, okay, so the not to exceed 10 miles. So if at some point we did want to, the people wanted to change it to 15 miles or 20 miles, it would not be a charter change. It would be just another
Let me
ordinance.
check with the city manager on that.
That would be a charter amendment. If you put in 10 miles, it's 10 miles.
So,
Okay.
yeah, it's going to
But
lock
you
us.
can further define in code regarding the 10 miles, but it is a charter. That would be another charter amendment that need to be voted on.
Okay.
Councilmember Demas.
And so I guess my only question is, do we want to limit ourselves to the 10 miles? Do we feel strong about that? Or do we want to?
Okay, that's a discussion to be had. How are we good? Councilmember Calhoun?
Yeah, that's kind of my thought, though. If we put it into charter,
We're back at.
then we're back at, you know.
Well, this is,
I don't like the open-ended where if we just say we're gonna do it, set it in, you know, do an ordinance later, set it in code later, because people are gonna look at that and go, nah, that doesn't make sense to me. But I don't know that I want to put the limits. Well, no, we probably should put the limits in charter, actually. Probably should. As long as it's not more than 10 miles out to the gravel pit.
my thought is if Seward expands that far out and there's housing in Seward, then a charter change might be worthy at that point. I don't know.
Mayor,
Yes.
Can I ask a clarifying question? I believe that you said on the Seward Highway. You said mile marker 0
Oh.
on the Seward Highway. Was that intentional?
Well, would people know mile marker 0?
Oh, indeed they would, yeah.
Without saying on the
is
Seward?
well documented. I bring it up because if you want to specify on the Seward Highway, you are sort of eliminating Lowell Point as a
No.
cost that's less than mile 0.
Well, I was not intending that.
Okay,
Radius.
that's why I mentioned it.
Okay, this is why we shouldn't be doing this. Let me get.
I'm
Vice
sorry,
Mayor
can you
first.
explain again what you just said, because I don't understand what you mean eliminating.
Okay, so the mayor in her motion, and I don't know if this was intentional, but she said to mile marker 10 on the Seward Highway, which defines a space from 0 to 10 northbound, and I don't know if that was the intention.
How else
With it.
do we indicate 10 miles?
Simple.
Councilmember Barlow?
I thought we agreed to within 10 miles of mile marker 0.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a circle.
Okay,
So instead of not
Let
to
me
exceed,
restate.
then within.
geographic, within 10
10
miles of
Mile marker
mile
0.
marker 0 on the Seward Highway. I didn't write it down, and I think that was my intention, without saying the word radius. Okay.
I'm
So
sorry, in
do it-
Seward, mile marker 0 in Seward, rather than on the Seward Highway, as you just said again?
Well, it is mile marker 0 on the Seward Highway.
Okay,
That's an
Perfect.
absolute that's not going to change.
okay.
No matter what, I think. So unless we lose more land down there in the next subsidence. So I think I'd like to say on the Seward Highway. Okay, any more discussion about that amendment? Madam Clerk, could you just read it again for us?
Yes. And I'm not sure that I think there's, okay, so this is what I have right now. The council shall provide in the code for language enacting geographical boundaries for the manager, or not for the manager, within 10 miles from mile marker 0 on the Seward Highway for the manager, which was part of the original.
Enacting geographical boundaries within
10 miles.
10 miles of
From mile marker 0 on the Seward Highway for the manager. Is that how you wish? Okay.
Yes.
And I agree with the clerk. I wonder if you could leave out for the manager, because it is under section 5.4 city manager, so it's automatically applicable to the manager, so I see where she's going.
Okay. Can I just read the whole proposition then, just so you can hear how that might sound? Or, Madam Clerk, you could read it. It's right in front of you. Just tacking that on and
Yes.
see if it sounds okay.
The city manager shall be chosen solely on the basis of demonstrated administrative qualifications, with particular emphasis on training and experience as a professional municipal administrator. The council shall provide in the code for language enacting geographical boundaries within 10 miles from mile marker 0 on the Seward Highway for the city manager. It doesn't actually refer to residents.
It doesn't refer to what?
Because the word resident.
Oh.
So it sort of now doesn't make sense.
Oh, for the manager's residence, the city manager's residence, sorry. Is that an amendment, a secondary amendment to my amendment, or can we just add that word in, Madam Clerk? Can we
Yeah,
just add
you
it
can,
in? So
yes.
it would say enacting geographical boundaries within 10 miles of Mile Zero on the Seward Highway for the city manager's residence.
Residents, okay.
Thank you. I'm not a wordsmith. Okay, discussion on that before we vote on the amendment. Councilmember Calhoun.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just the only question, just to ensure that with that language, it does not eliminate Low Point.
It shouldn't,
10 miles.
within 10 miles, yeah.
Hmm.
If somebody wanted to, yeah. Councilmember Barnwell.
Just speaking of wordsmithing, you could, instead of within, you could say not to exceed 10 miles. I mean,
Well, that
if
was
you want
the
to get
original
picky.
thought, but I'm okay with within, I think. People understand that. You want to vote on the amendment?
Yeah.
Okay, let's vote on that amendment.
Can I ask one more question that?
Sure.
Talk about wordsmithing. So rather than on the Seward Highway, could we say of the Seward Highway?
Of would be fine.
Okay.
People would understand that too.
Okay. So voting on the amendment to add, the council shall provide in the code for language enacting geographical boundaries within 10 miles from mile marker 0 of the Seward Highway for the city manager's residence. DeMoss,
Yes.
Finch,
Yes.
Barnwell,
Yes.
Osenga,
Yes.
Calhoun,
Yes.
and Mayor McClure.
Yes.
That amendment is approved and your main motion is back on the floor.
Okay, we have that amendment. Is there other discussion? Remember, what we're voting on here today is putting this as a vote for the people on May 2nd. So we're defining the language of the proposition. That's what we're doing. We're not voting, just for anyone watching, we're not voting on the actual action that the proposition suggests. We're just voting to let people decide. Councilmember Barnwell.
Speaking of that, how do the people get the information they need to make an informed decision? I mean, the explanation for that, do they get that, or how will they get that?
Madam City Manager, you probably have some ideas, or
And I would rely on the clerk as well, but so I would, just as with the first proposition, the council appropriated funds to the state statute languages to influence the outcome of the election. That is not proposed for this proposition. So the city clerk could clarify. So in my opinion, but to clarify, the public will receive the information from the legislation. That's how it would normally work. And I don't know if a brochure is done or, whatever.
Madam
It
Clerk.
would, right, from the resolution itself being distributed and on the ballot itself. That is the importance of the clarity of the question of the proposition on the ballot, so that if a voter received no previous information, they would be able to understand what they're voting on. And that's why it's critical to have it very clear and concise. So, as the city manager said, unless you appropriate funds to influence the outcome, there will be no further education done on it.
Councilmember Barnwell.
The rationale is kind of important, and I'm not sure people are gonna dig down that far to figure out the rationale, so I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure we want to spend money to advertise or lobby.
Councilmember Tomas.
Instead of spending money to advertise and educate, can we have a discussion before the election? Historically, does council ever have a discussion before an election to discuss things like that for purposes?
That would be considered
It would-
influencing,
Oh,
right?
I think people would have to go back to what we've just done and read the resolution, and then there's word of mouth. I mean, which that sometimes is not the most appropriate thing, but that's how it would go. Madam
ask the
City
clerk?
Manager, sure.
It is in the paper too, the notifications in the paper.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the question actually, and, correct me if I'm wrong, but both propositions will end up in the paper as advertising for the election?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Councilmember Barnwell.
Sorry.
That's
I
okay.
think you want to say, but I guess I'm getting to the rationale, which we don't really talk, we actually haven't dug into the data of the rationale. I mean, why are we doing this? I don't think we've been very clear about our intent of why we're doing this. And maybe on the record, we should just have a quick discussion about why we're doing this.
Okay. Well, as I said, when my name's on it, because that way we could get it on. And the reason it happened quickly was because we don't want a second special election, right? But it stemmed from a discussion amongst council members, partly at the retreat, that this would be a way of, it's because of the housing issues in Seward currently, and a way of providing for more options for future city managers to have places to live. In my mind, having to do with recruitment too, because as I said on the radio the other day, or yesterday, or to the reporter, we've had at least 2 instances recently where it was very difficult for city managers to find a place to live. And so, also, in looking into it, other cities have changed their charters to adapt to the changing times. And when our charter was formed, nobody hardly lived outside the city limits, so it wasn't really an issue, and currently we've got the housing problem. So that's pretty much my rationale for putting this on. Yes, Councilmember Tomas.
And I would agree with Mayor McClure. That's my reasoning. I think that it's a different time now in Seward. So many people live outside of town. There's some really nice neighborhoods, Cuesta Woods, Bear Lake, and with just the current labor issues, we don't know how long those are going to be issues for us. It puts us in a better position to have the most qualified city manager we can have when we can. It's just another. Housing is such a huge hurdle for so many people, and it just makes such a big difference with your lifestyle here. So you want to be able to offer the city manager the best offer you can, and that's a huge part of it. So that's why I support it.
Other discussion? Councilmember
Is it
Barnwell.
possible for the city manager to speak to this from her perspective? Or would that be inappropriate?
I have no idea. I think you can.
Just interesting to hear from,
As a, Madam City Manager, as a city manager.
Sure, but I will just do a little disclosure of, I'm not advocating one way or the other, I just want to state that. So, as far as housing in Seward, we know that's a housing issue, and so it's a housing issue for everyone, and however, if there's a house available outside the city limits, the city managers automatically cannot live there. I mean, I heard that there's 1 house for sale here in Seward right now, 1 in the city limits. True or not, there could be some that are for sale not through agencies, so, but 1. And so everyone's vying for that 1 house, and it's pretty impossible to get, a house. But there are some available outside the city limits. So, I think home ownership is important, and the investment in the community is important. I do want to speak a little bit about the emergencies. And the ability to communicate now that was not available in the past. It really wasn't. And part of it's cell phones, communicating through a cell phone. The landslide, actually Doug was out of town. He was in Soldotna. Mike was the first one on scene. But then we all communicated. Doug, I was on the phone with him right away, and everyone, we just communicated and got everything into place. An emergency can happen while the manager's at Costco on a Sunday afternoon. So it isn't just about living, it's the ability to communicate through an emergency is there. And And then I have heard about the investment in the community. What I really like about Seward is that even those who don't live in the city limits, you know, there's one person, maybe more in the audience, yeah, that don't live in the city limits, but they're very invested in the city of Seward. So I think Seward is, you know, kind of compact in its location, geographical location that creates everyone feeling a part of Seward. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Any more discussion? Are we ready to vote on the resolution? Appears we are, Madam Clerk.
Okay, voting on the approval of the substitute resolution as amended. Finch,
Yes.
Barnwell,
Yes.
Demas.
Yes.
Calhoun,
Yes.
Osenga,
Yes.
Mayor McClure.
Yes.
That resolution is approved.
Okay. That got us through the business. And now, I guess we have citizens' comments still. We did allow comments when we recessed, but we have a couple citizens here, so if you'd like to comment, that would be okay. And I'm getting a bit of an emergency call here, so I'm just going to make sure they know anything. Yeah, we'll need your name and
I'm Micah Van Buskirk, inside city limits. I was hoping to speak before, but it wouldn't have changed anything, I'm guessing. I wasn't able to make it on Monday. I listened to the meeting and was surprised that there wasn't anyone in support of this. And I wanted to just come in and say that I'm very much in support of this. Thank you guys for passing it. So none of this is, I'm going to still tell you all my thoughts. I think we should do anything that we can to keep our current city manager in the short term. I've never felt such optimism about the direction Seward is moving, and if this is any small part of retaining her in our town any longer, that would be a very smart move. I think it's important to update our city charter, and our city's growing and things are changing, like everyone said. That's important. And Seward is the whole community. Seward, we have these artificial city limits, but the community of Seward is all of us, and all the way up to Mileton, I think, is a very good example of that. She's the city manager inside our city limits, but the decisions that are made here affect all of us, inside and out. So I think that as long as she's inside this community, which you guys have decided, it's sufficient. I think that the access, emergency access, communications are more updated, and the bridges, if the bridges is really that big of a concern, we should maybe look at building another bridge or another access. I don't think that should stop this. In terms of the city building housing for the city manager, I don't necessarily think that's the best option. Maybe some temporary housing for employees as they come in, but every city manager is going to have different needs and different desires, and to build one house and expect every city manager to want that is not going to work. And I haven't talked to her about it, but I know as a fellow horse owner, that severely limits where you can live. We have to board our horse outside of town because we can't keep our horse inside of town either, and that is, I'm guessing, a big issue, and that's something that any city manager was going to have some variation on what they need and what they want for a house. And then as president of Lowell Point Community Council, I was going to ask you guys not exclude Lowell Point. Yes, we had that major landslide, but we don't normally have anything that closes our road that long, and hopefully we won't again anytime soon. They're small landslides that a couple hours, sometimes a day. I travel out that road 4 to 6 or 8 times a day, and it's manageable. It's not scary, but it is a choice people have to make to live out there, and I don't think it should be in the permanent charter that is an excluded location, because we have a federal DOT grant doing some engineering to improve that road, so I didn't want that to be made permanent as an exclusion. And I know my husband, the fire chief for Lowell Point, he was out there after the landslide within 30 minutes in our own private skiff. People at Lowell Point have means to move back and forth in case of emergency, because it does happen. Miller's Landing was moving people back and forth within an hour of that landslide, so it's not as, it was restrictive, yes. It did make things very difficult, but we're Alaskans and we like to overcome difficult adventures like that. And so thank you for passing this resolution. And I hope that some citizens, maybe myself, will make some public comments to the newspaper to support this and let people know.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back for council and administration comments and responses to citizens' comments. Administration.
The only comment I had is that Councilmember Wells texted during the meeting and apologized for not being able to be here. He had an emergency at his business.
Thank you. Councilmember Barnwell.
I think it was a thoughtful discussion. I think I'm pretty happy with the language on that. Looking forward to seeing what the people say.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Finch.
I look forward to seeing the charter get updated. I think communication alone can change a lot of the charter. I'm glad this opens up options for the city managers. And I think it'll be a good thing.
Okay, Councilmember DeMoss.
Ditto. I think, I really appreciate Micah's comments on, just updating charter. It's, a different time. So I appreciate everybody having an open mind here and the discussion, and I'm looking forward to the changes and seeing what the voters decide on.
And Vice Mayor Osenga. Oh, I'm sorry. I never do it this way. Councilmember Calhoun, sorry. Well, you're missing a person. It doesn't work right this way. Sorry. Councilmember Calhoun, I'll get you.
No comments.
Oh, well, see, I knew it. Okay, Vice Mayor Osenga.
No comment.
All right. Well, I just want to thank the council for their thoughtful consideration this is a difficult thing to do, and I think that we've once again shown that we have a thoughtful and caring council, and I want the citizens to be able to decide this issue, and so that's what we've set it up for. So with that, I will adjourn this meeting at 12:43.